And while Marco tries to see if we can get hold of Trevor. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Youth Day seminar that we're hosting here at the Human Sciences Research Council. My name's Adam Cooper. I work in a unit that's now called Inclusive Economic Development. We've merged what was the Education and Skills Development Unit with the Economic Performance and Development Group at the HSRC, and are now a big unit of about over 70 researchers. My kind of area of study is in the sociology of education, sociology of youth. I see our division leader, Charlene Swartz, is in that list of participants. Myself and Charlene are currently editing a handbook of youth in the Global South, published by Oxford University Press. And my sort of main interest in the world has always been the ideas that excite young people and what brings them to the table to speak, to participate, to feel like they are included in the kinds of structures and places that we think will be good for them, and often are a bit more complicated than that. I've hosted this Youth Day seminar for the last 5 years. This is the 5th year, and we've had some very interesting sessions comparing activism from the 76 generation with student leaders of the present. We've had a dramatic performance of a theatre director or two from the fall that was performing at UCT, at the Baxter Theatre, perform a piece for us at the HSRC, which was wonderful. And I sort of give that as background because I always, in thinking about the seminar, try and find something that's sort of capturing ideas of the moment and what's topical. And this year, where we have such just the world being turned upside down, it's when I saw this document doing the rounds of public universities with a public conscience, it struck me as something that's really challenging the way that we're thinking about this moment and what educational institutions might look like in it and in the future. And so I was really interested to hear more about some of the initiatives that are happening that, you know, if it's one thing that's become clear in this time, it's not only that it's not business as usual, or that it can't be, it's that the inequalities that already exist in our society, and which we should have been working harder to address before any of this COVID crisis came into view, we really need to see this as an opportunity to address those more at the front and center of making a different kind of society. And I think that in reading some of the principles that this initiative is embracing and engaging with, I think it's a real opportunity for us to talk about some of these issues and how they relate to education and educational institutions. Okay, so I think as a form of introduction, that's about, I'm just looking on my list, that is about all of the introduction that I need to say before handing over to, we have 3 speakers and a discussant. I think I will introduce each speaker as they take the mic, so that their bios and who they are is kind of fresh in our mind. But we're lucky enough to have 2 of the group that's sort of leading this initiative, as well as a student who is also a part of it, from what I understand, and then a discussant who has a long sort of track record as an activist, as someone engaged in issues of social justice, Trevor Kwane, to respond. Okay, so we're gonna start with Marco van Veeren, who's going to give an input, as well as Fikile Vilakazi. Fikile is at UKZN, Marco's at WITS, and then we will have We will have a student, Tobani Zikalala, who will also give an input, and then we'll have Trevor as the discussant, Dr. Juane. So when I read Maka's bio, I thought to myself, that sounds like something I would like to be in the world. He's an independent artist, experimental filmmaker, researcher, and educator based in Johannesburg. Over the last decade, he's developed a variety of film and performative projects, experimenting with media as he has critiqued issues in urban life, racial politics, gender, and sexuality. And his educational work focuses on liberatory pedagogic approaches to teaching and film, and he's based at WITS. So a very, very dynamic set of things that Maka is involved in, and I'm really excited to hear from him about this initiative and some of the work that the group are doing. Maka, are you ready to take over for about 15? We'll hear from Maka and Fikile for about 15 minutes each. Well, I suppose now we've got a third speaker, so maybe 10 to 15 minutes each, and then a 10-minute response from Trevor.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is really a fantastic opportunity, I think, to broaden the scope of our work. I think we recently had a meeting together, and we said it's really essential that this now gets taken into almost a more politicized phase, and a phase where we build not only support for the ideas that we're putting forward, but like really ways of implementing them and radically restructuring these institutions that we're part of. So I have to apologize in advance for the boring PowerPoint that I'm gonna try not to inundate us with text. But I just want to quickly share my screen, and then I'll talk through the points. My job at the moment, and I'm going to time myself, so I started a stopwatch now. My job is twofold. I need to firstly introduce everybody to the actual proposal. So what I've got is, and I hope you can see the shared screen. I'm going to quickly take you through this presentation so that there's a broad understanding of what the proposal is about. I've also linked, I've posted a link in the chat, and I can repost that link, because I know things sometimes tend to get lost. So I can repost that link again. But let's start with public universities with a public conscience. It's a plan for social pedagogy developed specifically for this time of the pandemic, and drafted by what we now call the Post-School Education Alliance for Social Pedagogy. And it has some antecedents. There's work, very important work, that preceded this proposal or this plan. The Black Academic Caucus was drafted at the beginning, really, of when we started seeing us moving towards lockdown and the crisis taking shape, drafted 5 different scenarios for how a university curriculum might be approached at this time. That was very valuable for us as a starting point. There's also the C19 People's Coalition, and many people who worked on this document were from that group, from the Post-School Education Working Group. And then there's the national discussion process that resulted in the creation of this document. It's a kind of a group that I think the history is a bit complicated, but it came from members of Black Academic Caucus, other academics, we got involved, and eventually we became the Post-School Education Alliance for Social Pedagogy. Now, the contextual analysis that we did basically told us that if this process of going online is unilaterally rolled out without certain things being put in place and without certain approaches being taken, we are facing an academic disaster that will exacerbate the existing disaster of COVID-19, the humanitarian disaster, which we know will include bereavement, dealing with illness, dealing with social contexts that are not supportive to study, etc. We're very aware that neither staff nor students immediately had the means to make this transition. And going online, we're very aware, simply widens existing inequalities. So our approach is based on the idea of social pedagogy. And here we're proposing something that is consultative, inclusive, that is sensitive to the context of students, of teachers, and communities. And that we work towards a mutually supportive framework. Very importantly, that'll not just carry us through this epidemic, but actually into a more equitable future. So the principles that we laid down as our own guidelines was inclusivity and participation, equity and equality. Equity, referring to equality of means, so that the means to study should be equal, and equality meaning the treatment of people, that nobody is treated as more important than anybody else. This, just as an aside, the university's response from WITS's side, from the exec, has been a matter of, if you can progress, if you have the means to progress, then you should progress right now as far as you can. And those who cannot progress now, we'll deal with them later, which are very problematic for us. So no sense of solidarity, essentially. So the third point being transformation and decolonization. So to take this moment to further the work, and this is June 76 that we're talking about, to further the kind of liberatory impulses in education that came from that moment, and others, including Fees Must Fall. And then still very much focusing on academic development and progress with integrity. So not to throw away the academic project or the very important kind of work of knowledge creation and so on that we're dealing with. So, but there were requirements. So the requirements included to stop the immediate rollout of online. We're not saying that we can never go online, or that doing anything online is a bad thing. What we're saying is stop while we don't have the means, and why we don't have the means also to ensure the safety, academic safety and general safety of our students and staff. Then a requirement is also state level intervention, so that the state is involved as a key player in rolling out a national project that includes infrastructure, digital infrastructure, etc. That there is safety and protection for students, and what I should also put in there, well, I see it is there, sorry, for students and for educational workers. So those are the key requirements. We looked then at 3 phases that take into account capacity, resources, the realities of the pandemic, and whatever social and health restrictions might be in place. Phase 1, we looked at initiating dialogue across the board, students, teachers, communities, mapping this context that and really understanding the implications. Then looking at adapting curricula, developing pedagogic strategies, and here, universities tended to be very supportive in terms of technological, how to take your course online, how to assess online, all of these, but not really dealing with pedagogic strategies of how to teach and how to have dialogic forms of teaching. Then phase 2 would be the rollout of in phase 1, this is a preparatory phase. Phase 2 is the rollout of a supportive process that starts involving curriculum material, but not assessing formally, and still kind of developing that material in response to the reality. And phase 3 is a return to campus, where the learning from phase 1 and phase 2 becomes reincorporated back into the formal curriculum. And now, with that in place, we continue and roll out more formal assessment. But by this time, things have changed. And the way that we approach education, if phase 1 and 2 has been followed, has actually changed and developed. So I want to add some commentary and provocations here. Let me just maybe liberate you from the PowerPoint so that I can just talk to you properly. Let me just see, am I back? I'm here, okay. Yeah, so the provocations that I wanted to launch just in the last, I think I've got maybe about 5 minutes or so left. So, you know, having of course drafted this plan, having circulated it, having gotten feedback from students and from education workers and other communities, we realize that we are now well into, you know, many weeks, months, in fact, of the situation, and many weeks, depending on, or months, depending on which institution you're at, of doing this exercise of trying to work online without really having done the preparatory phases that we suggested in phase 1 and 2. So we are taken off guard. We are in a deeply compromised situation as teachers, because we have to roll out our material within a framework that is against, if we had been working towards something equitable, towards something dialogic. A lot of the frameworks for that have simply been taken away from us. And our contact, our physical presence with the student has been taken away. And we haven't had the time to formulate a proper response to the situation. So, and yet we're being asked to assess, we're being asked to give marks, we're being asked to enter marks into the system. Deeply, deeply compromised situation. But this is the reality. We are here. We've got to ask. So here's my provocations. 1, we have to ask why our public institutions were not prepared for a more community-oriented approach at the onset of the crisis. Why were unilateral decisions taken and things moved ahead in a very unilateral way, starting with eviction of students from residences, which we argued at WITS could have been done in a way of firstly empowering students, giving them training, perhaps giving them safety kits, perhaps giving them pamphlets even to take into their communities, and consulting so that they aren't simply emptied out from the reses, in the way that they were. Secondly, you know, the online rollout, we were not consulted as teaching staff, in terms of how this might work, when will we be ready, etc. It just happened. So we need to ask, why was it that the stage was set for these unilateral ways of doing things, and why was the stage not set for a more consultative, dialogic, community-oriented approach? Second provocation is that there is this ongoing opportunity to mobilize towards what we call a social pedagogy approach. But there's the danger that with crisis, in a moment of crisis, the more conservative, the more neoliberal approaches will take precedence and will take power. So we have a moment of opportunity. There is, what many people have been calling and quoting Arundhati Roy, the portal moment, a moment where change can really happen. But we also faced with the fact that control, the impulse to control and the impulse to work in a managerialist way can take precedence. Third provocation is for us to return to the demands and the inspiration of the Fees Must Fall movement, and the history of liberatory education, including June 76. My next provocation is that for this to happen, it cannot just be slotted into the existing power framework of the university. It actually means really engaging with systemic change. So the university, the answer to my first provocation is, of why was it a unilateral managerialist approach taken? It's because that is the structure of our institutions. So that structure actually needs to transform and change. My next provocation is the idea of dialogue, dialogic education versus banking education, and decolonial thinking. these are ways of looking at education that can guide us and that have been put on the table over and over again, most recently during Fees Must Fall. But the impulse for a decolonial approach has largely been sidelined. So I think that needs to be reignited. And my last provocation leads us, I think, to Dr. Vilakazi, which is the question of community. You know, this dialogic approach to education is not just a pedagogic thing. It's a social thing, it's a structural thing, and we need to think about our community, including students, education workers, which include, you know, teaching staff, cleaning staff, security, research staff, admin, and the wider community outside of the university. And I think I want to stop there, having done about 13 or so minutes. I think I can hand over to Dr. Vilakazi. Thank you.
Okay, let me just introduce Dr. Vilakazi quickly. Thank you, Marco. It gives us a nice overview of what the group is doing and stands for, as well as some of the broader context and antecedents, as well as some of the broader global alternative ways that education has been done, dialogic education. There's a sort of Freirean history there. We're also very lucky to have Dr. Fikile Vilakazi, who's a lecturer in public policy and political science at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. She's also a member of the Post-School Education Alliance and rotational convener of the National Gender and Feminist Working Group COVID-19 People's Coalition. There were a number of activist organizations on her bio that she's a part of, and I think she's an excellent person to explore how this fits into both its own movement as well as broader changes that many of us hope can happen in our society. Go ahead, Dr. Vilakazi.
Thank you very much, Adam, and thanks to Moke. And I just want to say welcome to everyone. I'll also try and time myself and have this conversation within a period of 15 minutes. But I want to start, I think, from the place I come from this conversation from a political science perspective and really interdisciplinary perspectives as well, from a place of humanities. That, like you are saying, Mark, this conversation in this moment of COVID-19, I think for us the question is, what time is it? What time is it in our educational systems, in the world systems? And I think for me is about imagining a new world system that is emerging at the center of the COVID-19 outbreak. So my question is then, could this be an emergence of a new world system that we have been waiting for? A system that was predicted by a number of scholars over time, including, for instance, Immanuel Wallerstein, when he spoke about a possible collapse of the world capitalist order. Wallerstein examines the changes in what we call hegemonic cycles, perceived as mechanisms that during normal times, which we are fighting with normality, during normal times bring capitalism back into equilibrium. You know, however, during this coming 3 years, three or 4 decades, according to him, equilibrium will no longer be attainable. And this is what COVID-19 is about. Wallerstein diagnoses the exhaustion of possibilities to increase capital accumulation and therefore predicts the collapse of these different forms and manifestations of the capitalist order in the near future. And this future could have arrived. You know, so I ask a question then, could this be a moment of imagining another world that is possible? And many of us have been talking about these possibilities in the different spaces, within humanities, various schools of thought. Could this be an opportunity to imagine? I ask these questions because I see that whilst we grapple the dire effects of the pandemic, we are actually also rebuilding stronger networks of communities. So it is not just an illness, it is not just a disease, but it's a spiritual moment that is presenting itself as an opportunity to rebuild our communities and rebuild ourselves as a humanity. You know, communities that have been fragmented by various systems of segregation and violences over time, like the slave trade, global colonialism, apartheid, amongst many others, gender wars, systems that were rooted in heightened religious fundamentalisms, conservatisms of different kinds, punitive militarization of our bodies and communities through wars, conflict, and structural adjustments of our livelihoods globally. It's not just a South African problem. It's a problem that the shift is happening everywhere. So on a positive note, I see then how this COVID-19 pandemic, and as many of us, in the Alliance have been saying, like Moke is saying, presents us with opportunities to reorganize ourselves into global communities of care, love, sharing, collective beings, transparency, generosity, humility, and being social. It is reminding us at the core of our being of what it means to be social through collective ways of care, loving, sharing, humility, and giving of each other. So it is a moment that has reminded us of what it means to be home. COVID-19 placed us back at home, to be in shelter, to be in place, to be a family, to be a neighbor, to be a community that takes care of itself. And these are the values that are fundamental to what we call studies of humanities. So it reminded us of what it means to take care of each other in ways that hold together in collective forms of being, as embedded in our philosophical traditions of Ubuntu, Ujama, Ubuntu, as known in the context of the African philosophical ways of being. So for me, these are the questions that I ask. And I think the call from the Alliance is that we are calling for action and solidarity in this regard, to say, these are the questions that we call on us to reflect on through our various intellectual traditions and philosophies in our scholarships of humanities, social sciences, health sciences, economic sciences, and digital sciences, amongst many others, that we see as essential intellectual sciences of our times that are required to do this kind of thinking work, this type of analysis work in ways that assist us to find solutions that take care of us, and take us into this desired world and these desired ways of being in community during this COVID-19 crisis and beyond. And what we see is that we can no longer afford to be silent in the framing of these emergency responses that provide a nuanced intellectual response, an intellectual response that we see as grounded in multiple forms of analysis. That is not just biomedical. The responses that we see at the moment are really just biomedical, looking at COVID-19 as an illness and therefore it needs a vaccine. But what we see happening in the world is beyond biomedical. It is biomedical first and foremost because it hits our bodies. But we need an added layer of analysis and thinking work that emanates from indigenous ways of thinking, social ways of thinking, economic ways of thinking, political ways of framing what actually is time. Humanities and social sciences need to include studies and thinking in sociology, in anthropology, in political economy, in gender, in feminisms, in conflict and peace studies, migration studies, decoloniality, critical schools of thought, amongst many others, that can move us into that direction, in my view. So we caution, therefore, that as we do this thinking work, let us not do it in ways that do not put the lives of our students and teaching workers at the heart of the COVID-19 crisis. This pandemic is violent. This pandemic is vicious. It is pervasive. It is outrageous. It kills bodies. It is not a joke. So we are asking that we imagine together as a collective. It is not just a matter of one institution. It is a matter of governance. It is a matter of us as a human race to say, let us ask our governments, ask ourselves as our leaders in our institutions and ourselves as teaching workers, all of us as students, as parents, as workers. Let us be cautious in our decisions and reconsider, for instance, unthoughtful retaining of our students and teaching workers into danger. We have already lost lives. Many, many lives are falling as we speak. So our children and young intellectuals, we see them as an alliance, as our future intellectual capital. as an asset that we need to move us into a possible world that we are imagining beyond this COVID-19 crisis. So we must therefore protect our children, protect our young intellectuals and ourselves, all of us, against all odds from this viciousness and the violences of this COVID-19 pandemic and related systems and imagined world orders. So we're saying in our thinking, therefore, we can't just think in silos. We suggest that we keep our learners and students safe in places in shelter and in residences if we have to, whilst we use this time to reflect on how we can best encourage continued teaching and learning within communities, within places of residence, within places of safety, within shelters, in ways that enable us as a nation, because it's not about one university or the other. This is a national crisis. This is a global crisis. So in ways that enable us as a nation and as a globe to rebuild our social fabric. The social fabric that we see has been eroded over time by forces like your structural adjustment programs since 1945 and related violence is emanating from that era. So we are saying, let us rather use this moment not to repeat those mistakes of the past. We need to reimagine our relationship with the global financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, amongst many others. We are saying, let us avoid a mistake that Comrade Frantz Fanon constantly reminds us of about in our scholarship. Reminds us that we should not forget our intellectual responsibilities to shape, to reorganize, and to reimagine ways of moving ourselves from the violences of the past. So this calls on us to reimagine a world that is possible without the International Monetary Fund. And that world is possible. The world that is possible without the World Bank, amongst others. What we should rather do is to talk about how the BRICS Bank, the African Bank, the African Development Bank, the Latin American banks, the Caribbean banks, the banks of the Pacific Islands, the people's economies, and so on, can play in that role that we envisage, or the role that at least has been assigned to your kinds of the International Monetary Fund and World Banks and so on. Because we can play that role. So it is hoped that as we reimagine these new financial institutions and arrangements and reorganizations will then express themselves and they will begin an urgent task of distributing financial resources in ways that seek to build communities, stronger relationships and bonds within communities that will require to usher us into this possible world that is beyond COVID-19. So if we do this, our sense as an alliance is that we will emerge out of COVID-19 crisis with stronger communities, with revitalized social institutions, collective networks, and stronger social fabric that will hold us intact for many generations to come. This we owe to ourselves and our children and young intellectuals of the world beyond COVID-19. So our intellectual reading, Chairperson, is telling us that we have an opportunity to take ourselves into this possible world under this decisive leadership that we have in the world globally. We are the leadership. So we are calling other international institutions like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the Scientific and Cultural Organization to join hands in this conversation. This collective engagement between these institutions is very urgent. It is essential. And we feel it must actually be happening immediately if it is not started in the next couple of days, in the next couple of weeks, to begin a process of reimagining and reorganizing the world into a place of possibilities beyond COVID-19. So it's not a matter of just returning students to online learning. It's a matter of imagining a new world system. The withdrawal of the financial resources, for instance, from the United States government under the presidency of Donald Trump from funding the World Health Organization, we see it as a decision that the US must be welcomed to do that. We feel it is time. It is a power shift. It is a power shift that is happening globally. We can feel it also in our bodies and in our lives. Power is reorganizing itself in our favor. So we need to use these moments not to just think in silos and in smaller ways, but think globally, think systems now, in the next couple of days. We need to reorganize these international institutions in ways that build on a global people's economy. that is created and grounded on values and principles of collective sharing, centered in a place of deep love, care, and an intention to build rather than to fragment our international communities in ways that the IMF has done over past. So I know I do not have time, but I think I still have 5 minutes more. So what we're saying is that we also reimagine then the manner in which these institutions and others can be reorganized in a way that are driven from a place that does not sustain greed, in ways that does not sustain white monopoly patriarchal capital, who always have found stimulation from ways of working that use and abuse bodies of people on the ground, communities, for their labor, most of whom are our global South Africans, Black people, women bodies, working class bodies, bodies of people living in informal settlements, the majority of whom are our students, the majority of whom are our teaching workers within institutions. So we have an opportunity to stop this manner of violence now and for all, because it is an act of violence. So we have that power as expressed in our beautiful rage. This beautiful, calming, decisive rage that we see during this COVID-19 in the manner that we are organizing. We've seen it also with Comrade Tedros at the World Health Organization, when he demonstrated in the last couple of months, when he was talking to Donald Trump about the question of Blackness and race and Africanness. That we can no longer organize on the basis of abusing Africanness, abusing Blackness, carry these economies on the backs of Black bodies. So this is how we are going to fight the spread and the arrest of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we call for urgent solidarity between communities, between universities, between various institutions, to come together and imagine these emergency responses in ways that are reorganizing communities. So we need to stay in our communities. We need to make sure that we live in our communities, because that's where the work needs to happen in the first place. That's where the violence is happening in the first place. It means then we need to invest in localized collectives of people's economies, our informal traders, our homes, our young intellectuals who are located within these communities. We need to redistribute through our education systems, social security systems, knowledge systems, economic systems, social bonds, social networks that work together towards this vision. So it's not just a silo of one university bringing the student back and not that other. Our people are ready to support this vision on the ground, particularly our students and our teaching workers. So if we do this, we see a long-term process of reorganization of our social fabric, depending on how we respond, of course, in the next couple of days. So we see a collaboration, as I wrap up, Chairperson, that should call for our national government here at home and in other continents, ministries of education, our vice chancellors, our universities, student bodies, to rethink a decision that moves learners and students and teaching workers into stage 4 and other stage, now it's stage 3 in South Africa of this COVID-19, without imagining these possibilities. This is dangerous, a move. And we may regret for many years to come, for many centuries to come. So we reiterate a broader call that is made by the Alliance. Let us return to a social pedagogical approach, like Comrade Moke was saying. In an institution like where I belong, for instance, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, we are committed to building African scholarship that is driven from a place of intellectual excellence and greatness. The University of KwaZulu-Natal, we already have an amazing mechanism and portfolio that we call community engagement, which we can immediately utilize to place our teaching and learning in community as the COVID-19 crisis unfolds. We have a lot of mechanisms in place to assess through this mechanism, well-developed praxis. We are therefore ready as an institution to embark on our intellectual journey of teaching and learning excellence in communities in this regard. We have the infrastructure of NSFAS. We've got the infrastructure to organize our communities. We can utilize local creators, suppliers, distributors of food electricity, and water that are closer to where our homes are, our places and shelters are, to make sure that every student has got food to eat. Every student has got the resources that are needed to study. Every teaching worker has got electricity at home. The informal traders are suppliers. There are many ways in which this we can do, Chairperson. And I want to just close by saying this is calling for, therefore, a collaborated approach. It's not an approach that is looking at one vice chancellor against the other. And it's coming really from not repeating the mistakes of the past that was committed by our Black men in particular, our Black intellectuals, when we were changing and transitioning from independence. It's time of Ubuntu. It's time of our return to Africanness. So we require a collaboration between various schools of thoughts and traditions of teaching. An urgent collaboration between health sciences, social sciences, built environment, development social sciences, communications and information sciences, housing and settlement sciences, digital sciences, that prioritize thinking and imagination work through scholarship and research in a number of areas. But these are the critical, essential schools of thought, not just sciences, not just medical sciences. Food security is critical. Electricity and energy supply is critical. Water and sanitation is critical. Shelter and place in communities is critical. Communications and information sciences are critical. Political sciences and international relations are critical scholarships. Critical epistemes like gender, feminisms, constructivisms, anthropological teaching and learning, sociological teaching and learning, rural and township development, local and township economies, digital sciences, heritage and tourism, teaching and learning, geography and environment, amongst others. So we cannot therefore prioritize just medical sciences, because this COVID-19 is not just a biomedical problem. It's a systemic problem. The world is changing. So we are calling for a new world system. We are not even calling for it. It is unfolding. It is happening. It is an energetic shift. It's a political shift. It's an economic shift to say once and for all, the world is tired of the violences of slavery. The world is exhausted of the violences of colonization. The world is exhausted of the violations of apartheid. We need to return to humanity. Humanity that does not even see race. Humanity that does not see gender. Humanity that does not see us as different people, but recognizes that we are human, all of us, in all our diversities. And that is found in the foundational principles of Ubuntu, Ujama, Butu, in our Pan-Africanist thinking of thought, which we have lost over time because we're told that we are things that we are not, since 1945, since 1652. So that's what we are saying as the Alliance, as I was adding to comment, Moke, that this thing is systemic. I have 1 minute left. It is systemic. It is not just a pandemic. It is an opportunity for us to reimagine. We are appealing to our intellectual imaginations to say, let us not box ourselves within silotic responses that just return this one student and the other. It's not about that. It's about saying we need our students. When our students told us during the hashtag fees must fall, that something has got to change, something has got to fall. Our responses were limited to just looking at the violences without actually recognizing that our students are living in the moment, a moment of change, a moment of transition that is forcefully happening to all of us, whether we like it or not, whether we are part of the conversations or not. That shift is occurring, and our intellectual responsibilities is to move with that shift. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vilakazi, for that call to action. And it was very poetic and powerful to listen to some of the ideas that are coming from yourself, but also from the broader group. Thank you so much. We now are very fortunate also to have an input from a student, Tubani Zikalala, who is a BA student in Industrial, Organizational and Labor Studies, Political Sciences, and Andrew Mellon Foundation Fellowship for Critical Food Studies. He is a student of decoloniality and an activist. And I think it's very important for us to on this Youth Day, every time I look in the camera on these many Zoom sessions I have, I see how gray and bald I'm going, to have voices from people who are most affected by many of these issues. So over to you, Tobani. Tobani, are you with us? Why do I not see you?
I'm here. Oh, sorry, I was muted. Sorry.
There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm saying, let me maybe begin with greeting everyone else. I'm very much grateful to be part of this space. It is nice to be in such spaces, especially in this time of crisis, to be able to engage in thoughts and engage in issues of national importance. First of all, maybe let me begin with a light-hearted moment to say I'm very much grateful for the fact that I present just after my lecturer has finished with such a very powerful intellectual contribution. For some, they will not know, I sat in a class that Dr. Vilakazi taught in. So it, for me, is a very beautiful moment. Of course, some of my other lecturers are here. I saw Pablo Morano, who's also my lecturer for labor studies, who's also here. And I see also my comrade, Sbonelo Staha here. These are people that I've interacted with in my intellectual chain. Mine will be very short because I'm simply going to try to relate what it has meant to be a student of the university in these times of crisis that we find ourselves in. And maybe also just as a passing comment on some of the things that have been mentioned. I'm also very fortunate that I was part of the group of young people that were part of the Fees Must Fall movement. So if I call myself a student of decoloniality, it's because I have tried over the past few years to engage with what would mean to have a different kind of society and a different kind of university that embodies the spirit of the people that it teaches, right? So, for example, I'm a student at UKZN, or I was a student at UKZN before UKZN refused to register me because I'm a poor person. This is after I've been awarded a fellowship with the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and they paid a part of my owing fees. And the university, because of the crisis period, used that as an excuse to not process some of our registrations for those of us who were not registered before the crisis, right? So when we went out of the university, when we were driven out in buses with the hope, with the promise that we'll be coming back in 2 weeks, some of us were not registered at that time. And when we tried to process our registrations from home, the university told us that it has now closed for the year because it has reached its quota. First of all, this is something that has not happened in UKZN for the past 3, 4, 5 years, where the registration closes in March, and that it means it has closed for the whole year for everyone else. But this is where we find ourselves now. We have a scholarship or let me say a fellowship from Andrew Mellon that will allow us to pursue our honors project, a research project, but the university refuses to register us. Right? First of all, we are the people who are, some of us have the means to register because some people have promised to pay for us. Some of our parents have went to loan monies for us to be registered. But now the university says we can't register. There's a second group of students who, before the crisis, were trying to find means of registration. And because they were too poor, not having the money to register because they were owing fees, those students are closed out. So when we speak about what the COVID-19 crisis has meant for students, we mainly are focusing on the students that were registered and were eligible to attend classes and everything else. But we, in a way, sometimes forget that there are students who have been financially excluded. Right? At some time, the Vice Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal was proud to say that he will exclude 2,000 students who he calls permanent or professional students. This is outside of the group that was excluded because they had financial problems or academic problems. There was a group that the University of KwaZulu-Natal said, whether they attain academic clearance and financial clearance, they will not be registering them. And they've used the COVID-19 crisis to cover some of that violence and that crime that they've enacted on the futures and hopes of young people in this country. So for me, I thought maybe let me start there to say, who is registered at the university today? And who has the crisis excluded or enabled their exclusion from the university? That's the first part. The second part is to say, what is the socio-economic demographic of the university and what has been the response of the university in serving that socio-economic demographic of the students that it has? So some of us are from deep rural KwaZulu-Natal, some of us are from townships, and of course, some of us are from the suburban areas and whatnot. If that is a social makeup of the university, when the university quickly moves to online learning, what does it say from someone in Engutu who lives in the area with no running water, with no electricity, who lives in the area where connectivity issues are there, right? I think in one of the meetings we had, I related on saying, even though it's not the most ideal solution, I would have thought that the university, when it responds to the crisis, will maybe respond in trying to make themselves like what UNISA has been doing for many years of distance learning. But no, that's not what they are doing. What they are doing, they're saying, we are taking the contact university, put it in the digital virtual space, and you are going to be in the contact university, but in your space of home. But what is this space of home that people talk about, right? The reality is that if I come from Katomena, if I come from Kwamashu, I'm living in a household where there's plus or minus 8 of us in one space. I'm living in a home where I do not have the luxury to sit the whole day engaging with education because I have got household chores. Because some of us live in households where there's no help. So I must wake up, I must clean the house, I must wash dishes. And some of our parents really don't understand the idea that just because you are a student and you are home, you will not be participating in household chores because you must be on Zoom meetings, you must be on online learning and whatnot. So the idea of negotiating the home terrain as a student has not been taken into consideration in trying to find the solutions. The third part is what I think what Dr. Vilakazi touched on, is the idea of who has been made an essential student, right? And for maybe for a lack of a better expression, who is the student in the COVID-19 crisis? Because the universities, together with their higher education minister, have classified who becomes a student of the university or the contact university. And unfortunately, they have been focused more on the so-called essential skills or essential education. So the health sciences. But who makes up the health sciences? Because we must question that also. And this is not to say those who are in the health sciences or in the engineering spaces are not important, but we must question who is in that space. I am a student of University of KwaZulu-Natal. So I know that in the health sciences, and in particular engineering, the students that are in that space, majority of them don't even stay on campus because most of them come, they got dropped off on campus and get picked up on campus. These are students who live in the Phoenix area, in Durban North, in Umhlanga Rocks, and the other affluent places. So the socio-economic makeup of the student in engineering is in majority students that already have the resources and the capacity to manage, at least in this crisis. So you have a solution that is not people-centered because it does not think about the people that it's supposed to solve the problems of. So the university today says it's going to return 33% of its students. But mark my words, in that 33%, majority of those students don't even need to stay at residence because they stay at home, right? So if you are saying you are returning people to campus, which people are you returning? Because a student from Dorinkop, which is my home village in Watuguza, where there's no running water, where there's connectivity issues, where there's issues of space and many other issues of violence in the area, that person majority of them are in the so-called non-essential qualifications, because we interact with each other, and we have seen that, for example, at UKZN, you have students, the students at PMB, the students at Westville, and maybe students at Edgewood and at Howard are not the same, right? You can clearly categorize that in the engineering and health sciences, majority of those students are students from the spaces where they could at least try to negotiate the salary. As I end, I want to end on a note of what does the new university that we envision mean and what it should be, right? So now this is a university that must be, first of all, people-centered, as we say in the social pedagogy document, must have a public conscience. So it must be a university that understands its own people, right? And inculcates in its studies, in its research, in its pedagogical deliverance, the people that it serves. You have a university with the Howard College campus next to Katomena, which has no interaction with the people that live next to it, right? The people who are doing academic work at Howard College have no physical and intellectual interaction with the people who live just across the road in Katomena. So if you are reimagining the university, you must reimagine the university to say our scholarly work, our intellectual work must be done in the communities that we come from. Now, if we're in the space of COVID-19 crisis, shouldn't we have been able to think about a situation where our pedagogy starts to inculcate the communities that we come from, so that when we return to university, all of us are in one way at least at the same stand? The university makes a point of saying those who could not catch up will have them once we come back. But the question is, when are we coming back? Because no one knows when we are going back to university. So chances are someone like myself who is left behind in their studies may come back in September, but may come back in September with a university that envisions ending their semester in July or August. So when am I catching up when I'm already behind in terms of my studies, and my peers are now in their second semester? So this is the type of the crisis that we are facing. And unfortunately, this is not the language that the powers that be are having. The powers that are in a situation of saying, let us save the academic year. But the question is, when you save the academic year, who do you save it with? And what of the student? Because we are saving an academic year here, but we are not caring about students' lives. We're not caring about students' hopes. We're not caring about their futures. We are simply just saying, those who can join us, join us. Those who can't join us, we will put measures in place that seem to make a point that we are trying for you to make it with us. But chances are, our people are not going to make it, right? We have friends who have not received the data that the university had promised. We had people without laptops. For example, myself, I finished my undergraduate degree without a laptop. I always depended on the school library, on the university library, on the computer labs of the university. Now that I'm outside of the university, I have no tools in place, either in terms of academic material, in terms of tools, of laptops and whatnot. I have no such a thing where I am, because I've always depended on the university. But the university does not take that into consideration when it speaks about the students that need to come back to campus. And of course, when the University of KwaZulu claims that they're going to give people laptops, what they are doing is that they give the laptops they were already going to give, even if we encompass the laptops of the NSFAS funded student. The non-funded students are being told that there will be a loan process that they will have to loan laptops from the university, and then go and engage with financial institutions in how they can pay the shortfall of the laptop. This is the reality that we find ourselves in, and unfortunately, we have a university and education sector that does not care about its participants, especially its future, right? The student. I will end there for now, Chair. I think I went for too long, but I will end there for now, and maybe if we come back, then we can maybe engage further. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tobani. And it's a great framing of how these issues are not only about COVID, they're about who gets included and who gets excluded in broader processes related to education. And I think it was a very, very powerful way that you've done that for us. Thank you. We're a little bit behind time, so I'm going to ask Dr. Trevor Juane to give a 5-minute discussant input. He's got a long history of involvement in various activist type circles and issues, including workers, education, social activism in relation to the Soweto electricity crisis, anti-privatization forum, and is also an editor of a book with Emmanuel Ness and Luke Sinwell titled Urban Revolt, State Power and the Rise of People's Movements in the Global South. So thank you, Trevor, for offering to act as a discussant. If you wouldn't mind sort of only taking 5 minutes, and then we'll have inputs from whoever else would like to say something. Thank you, Dr. Juane.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Black Academic Caucus and the C19 People's Coalition, their post-school working group, for this document, and also thank everyone in this webinar. I think the call for a dialogue is at the heart of the document, the Public Universities with a Public Conscience document. So today in this webinar, we're having a discussion as academics, as students, sharing our views and our experiences. We come from different institutions, different disciplines, which is great. And this should be happening in all the institutions, within faculties, within departments, and across institutions. The technology is there, and I think it is time well spent. So we can share our ideas, techniques of teaching, challenges as teachers, as students, as auxiliary staff, as workers, as administrators. In fact, we can turn our discussions into moments of solidarity and try and build stronger bonds among ourselves. Because united we stand, divided we fall. So the discussion question I'm going to pose to the presenters and the whole audience and members, participants, is how can we extend this dialogue beyond ourselves here, about 100 of us? Because if the hundreds are talking to each other, it means there's a need for the thousands to talk to each other. Indeed, the millions must talk to each other. So I think that is the way forward I'm trying to get from this discussion. So what are the burning issues today? What is at stake? So I think there are 3 major topics under discussion. Firstly, it's online teaching and learning. Secondly, is COVID-19, the dangerous pandemic, which is killing people, killing us. And then thirdly, it's decolonization, the process we used to call transformation. So from this point of view, and since I don't have much time, let me summarize my response to the presenters using these 3 topics in 3 sentences. So online teaching and learning was introduced in a rush and as an emergency measure to save the academic year because of COVID-19. Because of this rush, decolonization became less important. Now, decolonization is about the struggle for social justice in our higher education system and in society. So rushing into online teaching and learning sharply raised social injustices associated with, for example, the digital divide. And we all know that rushing into anything in life will create some problems. But often when we rush into things, we tell ourselves that we have no choice. I think the public universities with a public conscience document is suggesting that we do have a choice. That is its power, actually. In fact, in history, too many injustices have been allowed to continue using the argument there is no alternative. One small point is that another problem is that online teaching and learning is actually being approached wrongly. It's like a deficit attitude, you know, a stopgap measure. So there is not adequate weighing of its strengths and weaknesses. So for example, myself, I did my junior degree through UNISA. That was distance learning. I had to do it because I didn't have money, you know, so it was convenient. But of course, I had the advantage that I had sat behind a desk before, so it was easier. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to look into a kind of learner-centered and needs-based analysis of our way forward. Now, the top-down approach, which has been adopted by the government towards COVID, by the Department of Higher Education, by our university administrators, you know, is the opposite of that. So lastly, I just want to add that, you know, I was teaching this second term, so I found that the process is very labor intensive, you know, and also the personal touch, connection with students is still very much necessary. So, and also when my laptop broke down, it became clear that I still needed a technician. So, and in fact, then I realized also the water must still flow, the toilets must flush. When I go to the supermarket, I must still get the food. So it means that even though we do online, which actually is remote learning, as Chobani was trying to argue, there is a whole group of people, ordinary workers, who make this gig economy, this online learning to happen. Even in our universities, I'm sure we're sitting here working from home, but the workers are there, the cleaners are there, the secretaries are there. So I think it's most important that in our vision for the public university, we should also include ordinary workers, auxiliary staff, etc., etc. And indeed, we should stand with them against being forced to go back to work despite, you know, protective equipment being given. So I want to thank the organizers for this opportunity. And I want to go back to what Dr. Vilakazi said. We need a vision for a more just and equitable higher education system. And I think this document provides the starting point for a dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Juane, for those for nice summaries of what's been said, and also I think raising the very important issue of how this extends beyond the 100 or so people that are part of this forum to those out there. It's time now to take some comments and questions and make this a dialogue, a bigger dialogue. So please raise your hands. I hope you're all familiar with Zoom by now. And if you're not, there is a button which you can press to raise your hand at the bottom of your screen in the participant window. But I thought maybe just before that, we could all, if we have the powers, could just turn our cameras on. Tobani asked, can we see everyone's face? And in the interest of something a little more social, if you are able to turn your camera on for even 1 minute so that we can see all the faces that are here and how many people have joined this discussion, that's great. In the interests of bandwidth and not over stressing the system, we sort of asked for them to be turned off, but that's great to see so many. You can also see that the weather's pretty cold in both Johannesburg and Cape Town at the moment. I don't know if KwaZulu-Natal ever gets very cold, but yeah. Thank you all for joining, and it's a great privilege to chair this session. Okay, I see one hand. Can't believe there's only one comment, but maybe we should turn our videos off now just for the sake of not making the system collapse. Maybe partly what we want to do is make the system collapse with this session, but okay. Sibonelo Radebe, do you want to go ahead? I see a hand up from you and start us off with comment, question, input.
Hi, thank you very much. Just to say, I did not know about this. Part of the excluded group as well from the university, but we try and keep up on issues that include social justice. I think one or two comments and then suggestions that I will have. One is that the first one is that I think I'm glad that there are academics who are, quite cognizant of the fact that there is a push, unlike before, to create a sort of dichotomy between society and university. In as much as our society is divided, is capitalist in nature, and so universities are pushed so that they are going to mirror the kind of a society that we have, so that the status quo remains. And part of that is also seen by how, for instance, the concept of essential students, in as far as higher education is concerned, sort of shifted from the idea that we have of what the president usually speaks about, of wanting to save lives and make sure that the COVID-19 does not change the ideas of equality that we want to run our society with. Because once you say, for instance, they are essential students, you are essentially perpetuating divide. And by consequence, that divide is going to become racial and to an extent become a divide of class. And I think Toban and Dr. Figile touch on this, that when you speak about essential students, you by default saying that those who are rich and have convenience of accessing must come, and those who cannot do for their own, therefore they must be excluded. And part of this is also mirrored. Recently, I think there's a lecturer from UCT who said, who wrote an academic piece abusing academic freedom, saying that usually Black students do not take up biological studies for reasons that he mentioned, or she, I don't know. But when you look at that and compare it with the concept of being essential, you can see how then academia becomes problematic if it's not guided. One speaks about someone who's essential, and you know that in the context of South Africa, we're a capitalist, anti-Black society, and therefore a person who becomes essential is a person who is privileged in terms of race and becomes privileged secondly in terms of class. Now, I think we've got to be very careful, one, in terms of the wordings that we are using while we try and create this kind of a solidarity, which I support fully, and quite very happy that we have in our midst people who try and think around this idea. But also what I will want to propose is that, having had this document of the public universities with a public conscience, I think we'll have to, as a proposal, that how if after we've generated much of the support, and all of us, I think from my side, I'm going to share the document and try by all means possible to preach what the document speaks about, and essentially try by all means necessary to draw the people who are student leaders. By student leaders, I mean those who are given authority to lead students in the form of HSRCs and all, to share the gospel of this document. And also, if the document can be somewhat in a form of a point form, as a practical document, to say, here is a solidarity forum that we are proposing of public universities with public conscience. As a preliminary step from phase one, which the presentation spoke about, these are the things that we are proposing as a line of march, and that document can then be circulated to all people while you know, this kind of an activism to build the organization from the ground is also given attention to. I think that's my point. One is that we need to be careful on the wording that we use, that it does perpetuate the very same thing that we want to do against with. And secondly, that can we have more flesh on the document so that it will appeal not just as an elitist sort of a form of academics who want to monopolize intelligentsia, but let's spread it out. I think I'll end there.
Thank you, Sibonelo. That's a great call for reflection and to think about some of our practices as we move forward, and again, some of the divisions and exclusions that are continuing. I don't see any other hands, which surprises me because it's a very topical issue and there's been so much raised today. And nobody else, Marco, would you like to go ahead? I was going to give all of the presenters or speakers a chance to have a final word, but I don't see anybody else with a hand raised. So Marco, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to follow on, you know, that point. I think it was, I've lost the name now. Was it Sibonelo? Made, you know, regarding the need for some kind of a solidarity forum. And I think that is really the next step that should be taken, is that this document, if there seems to be a need that this proposal needs to be fleshed out, the initiative to draft that proposal was indeed, it was taken by academics, but you know, the filling out of that plan and of the strategy and of how to move forward, really that part needs to be a very broad forum that include all these constituencies that we were speaking about, and that Comrade Trevor also brought, you know, very into crisp focus. So I just would like to say that is the next step, that we need to do this collaboratively. You know, the invitation is there. I think I would like to propose that this platform, and maybe that'll be my final word because I don't want to take time from any further participation from the floor. But if you can assist us as well in terms of everybody who has participated in this forum, you know, if we can just use a mailing list to distribute the invitation to participate now. And that's basically a directive to us to do our job now and to actually take this forward. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Marco. And I will also try and get a list of all of the participants here, as well as the presentations, and email people the links to that. This has been recorded. Some of you have asked, I see in the chat, and we can circulate that. Fikile, Dr. Vilakazi, do you want to go ahead? And then we have Jane Quinn and Sajid Seda as well with hands up.
Yes, thank you very much. Chair, I mean, I just want to say thanks to Star and to Bud and all the speakers, and I really concur, but just to say that this conversation about reorganizing communities is not happening just within the education sector. It is a rhythm that is felt in the various spaces, because I also happen to sit in the spaces of gender conversations about gender wars of the past and so on. And I sit also in spaces of indigenous knowledge systems with healers in the globe, where it is about energetic shifts. And I think the message is that let us reorganize our communities. That is the fundamental message that is cutting across. So as we are circulating this document, my suggestion, and I think the Alliance also was saying, it does not just belong to the education sector. Let us send it to workers, to our neighbors, to parents, you know, to our sisters and brothers, because if you're going to reorganize communities, we all have to work together. So everybody, and I agree with Usta, it should not be a document that is seen just as an intellectual piece, but it needs to be seen as a community mobilization tool to say we are reorganizing ourselves. So can we get it in simple forms as much as possible to our doorsteps? My sister needs to be able to speak to it as much as I can. My brother, my friend, and my neighbor, and so on. Thanks.
Thank you, Fikile. Yes, and it's great for all of us from different parts of the world, even those of us who work for a government science council, to be able to be involved in these discussions. Okay, Jane Quinn, I saw you had a hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. And I mean, I'm pretty much picking up on what the last three speakers have said. I think picking up from Star, who was amplifying what Trevor was saying. But really, I want us to use this forum as far as possible to consider how we practically do this kind of reorganization of taking this document and follow on practices. How do we practically take them out into our communities of practice and plays in some way that we come back and speak to each other, so that absolutely, as we spread this out, how do we do that but keep having a coordinated response, because that's where the strength comes from. So I'm just looking for sharing practical ideas on how we take those suggestions forward. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jane. And maybe we can also hear from the group how some of these conversations, I think they have a WhatsApp group. I don't know what needs to be done to be included in that group, but yeah, where some of these conversations continue. Sajida, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much. Hi all. I'm covered by the others in terms of talking about using this space and the group, this group here to take this project forward. But I wanted to share an experience which I really think speaks to what we have talked about in terms of the very authoritarian corporate university that we are confronted by, and how difficult that is in terms of working for social justice in and through universities. I circulated the advert for this HSRC webinar, and previously Jane and I, Fikile, we all at UKZ and Clint have all circulated the document, and we have within our small spaces, within clusters and disciplines, tried to engage our colleagues and tried to call for engagement with the document. But what was interesting was the resistance to even engage with this document. So it's very encouraging that people have come to this webinar and see this as the beginning of a dialogue that will contribute to creating alternative decolonized spaces in higher education, and I think in education per se. So when I sent the webinar, and this was just in my school, I sent it to the administrator who usually sends out emails to the whole school, and then this morning received an email from her to say that they have been instructed not to circulate emails from staff unless it is from the school, from the college, from the university. So, you know, I'm appealing to people here who might be part of management to begin to interrogate these spaces that are occupied by managers. And I'm deliberately using the term managers because I'm not sure that we have been leading, that managers at whatever levels have been leading us, particularly in this time. So a real appeal, how do we actually begin to get this? I even went to the extent of raising it with the VC in a, what was it, staff assembly that he held? And I felt like it was just simply brushed off, but I was encouraged because he said, yes, he did read the document and they did draw some things from the document, and perhaps UKZN has, because UKZN used May as a dry run to kind of, you know, in inverted commas, consult. So an appeal to managers, appeal to all, let's get this document out there and let's really, truly engage with it because the possibilities are endless. Thank you.
Thank you, Sajida. And I think that's very important for these communications to be distributed and for further engagement to happen at the core of some of these ideas. I see my former PhD supervisor, Professor Azim Badruddin, is waiting with an input. Go ahead, Azim.
Hi, Adam. Sorry. Hi, all. I don't normally like to be introduced in that way because we're all colleagues. I think the important thing is that we need to understand the moment as well. As we engaged with the current challenges and as we speak up and try to push back at the current challenges, that as we become imbricated in the system, as we do it, as we assess, as we move forward in this ERT, we also need to keep in mind the other side of the challenges that we are now part of. And that is that we also need to start speaking to the psychosocial impact. We have to start speaking to scientists and researchers and make them understand the complexity of education. We can't step back and not take that on as a challenge. We need to rethink the education dogmas and orthodoxies that we were part of in the past, and how we start rethinking those dogmas and orthodoxies. And then we also have to start speaking about the two other things. The COVID moment has provided an opportunity to push back on the privatization appeal. And it gives us an important time, it gives us an important moment to start speaking to it and start highlighting how dangerous it is. So we need to start speaking to that. That is one of the elements. And then the other element, of course, is the surveillance state, and how we work with the idea of the surveillance state moving forward. So I think we need to also think about this COVID moment as not simply about how we get our education back to the community and how we start engaging with these issues, but we also need to start projecting new ways of thinking about education against that larger landscape of privatization, surveillance state kind of narratives. Thank you.
Thank you, Azim. Very wise. And yes, I look forward to more of these alternative pushbacks against the privatization of education. Sven Glittenberg, I see his hand is raised. I have been privileged enough to see Sven give a class at the school in Soweto where he used to teach, and it was one of the best examples of pedagogy, full stop, that I've seen. Never seen students so excited about an English class. Sven, go ahead.
Thanks, Adam. As somebody who's new in higher education, I was teaching at school until the end of last year, and I'm now teaching teachers at UJ, and has found it quite shocking how much of a business I've landed up in, and not an educational space, and even more ironic that we're teaching teachers in this way. I'd appreciate it if, and I know that we need action as well as reflection. I'd appreciate it as somebody who's new to trying to understand this space and the various factors. If perhaps those who were interested, we could meet on a more regular basis, maybe once every 2 weeks, have sort of a discussion group around some of the fundamental issues and concepts, like those the previous colleague had mentioned. The surveillance state, neoliberalism in higher education. It would be great to have some sort of a regular group to discuss readings with, and just arm oneself with the knowledge that's needed to critique these systems. Thanks.
Thanks, Sven. And I think quite a few people here would be excited about such an engagement. I don't see any other hands. Azim's hand is still up. I assume that's from his last input and not to make another comment. So I think, well, it's 1 minute to 2, exactly on the dot. I thought we might go over time, but thank you all for joining today. It was a very lively discussion, and I hope that these conversations can get taken forward in whatever form emerges. And I think there have been a number of suggestions, but it would be great if everybody could be kept just in the loop of developments in this regard, and generally in sort of alternative thinking around education, and what this moment that is ironically a crisis has opened up people to imagine alternatives, or being forced to imagine alternatives. And I think it's a real moment to push forward with that and not go back to business as usual. Okay. Yeah, I will distribute the list of people who were participating here, as well as the live recording for people to look at and share. And please, let's keep in touch. I don't know if everyone wants to turn their cameras on for one more second just to say goodbye, wave and
I'm not able to turn mine on, Adam.
Sure. Okay. Well, whoever's able to turn theirs on and wants to wave goodbye, go ahead.
Yeah, you can open mine. I'd love to see some faces.
Goodbye.
From my side.
Yeah, I'm muted as well,
Right.
but goodbye, comrades.
Yes, if people want to unmute and have a shout out, that's.
It says we cannot, only you can.
Oh, how do I? Here's the organizer looking at. Tabo, can you help me here? Can I get some support from the HSRC? Can you?
Everyone can unmute themselves, eh?
They must unmute themselves too. Okay.
On the mics.
Adam?
Arlene.
Hi. I think we should put the recording on our website, then people can access it because we don't have everyone's emails. We've got about 53 of the emails.
Okay. Well, maybe if you did participate today and you didn't RSVP, you could just send your email address through to what was the RSVP, and then so Arlene on www.hsrc.ac.za.
It's on the actual event page where it's advertised. It should be there. Well, as soon as it's been edited, it'll take a few days.
Okay, it'll be on the Eventbrite page.
No, not Eventbrite. The HSRC event page.
Okay.
The seminars are where it's advertised.
Great. So people can look for the link there if they want to share this or rewatch it in the time you have at home. Thank you, everybody, and have a good.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you from Cape Town.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yeah, because in fact, I've